IVM.
We would like to thank Storytel for sponsoring this show. Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile, on your PC, wherever you prefer. You can get a great deal by signing up at storytel.com/IVM. This week I'm going to recommend a book called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. It's a book by Richard P. Feynman. Richard P. Feynman, if you're unaware, is one of the most impressive physicists of the 20th century. He's been a public intellectual. You'll find him in all kinds of videos on YouTube. Really, really fun guy to watch and listen to. This is a series of articles, interviews, essays, all that kind of stuff put together, like, short works put together. Really, really fun read. Definitely check it out. The Pleasure of Finding Things Out by Richard P. Feynman. You can get this on storytel.com/IVM. If you go and sign up from that link, what you'll get is your first month for 99 rupees instead of 299 rupees. That's $200 off your first month. Go check it out, storytel.com/IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Those of you who have been following All Things Policy for a while, or who might have done any of our courses, would probably have heard of this thing that we call PublicGyaan. Now, PublicGyaan is basically a sort of prediction market where we put up our forecasts, things that we think are likely to happen in the foreseeable future, and people basically bet on the outcome of those questions. It can be a way for people to make a whole lot of digital money. We have here today two of our most prolific bettors, Anupam and Pranay. Hey, guys.
Hello.
So over the last year, we've seen some pretty nutty predictions. The one that is really going to the wire right now is our prediction about whether Donald Trump is going to remain the US president, even though he's lost the election. But we have a whole bunch of new questions in 2021. And generally, we've found that the prediction market can be an interesting way to kind of gauge public opinion on various matters, both in terms of what's happening in India as well as in the world at large. So let's try to set up a little bit of context about how this idea of prediction markets works and all that before we actually get into our predictions for 2021. And I'd just like to remind you at the very outset that if you find this conversation interesting, if you find the concept of PublicGyaan interesting and want to kind of compete with Takshashila stuff to see if you can predict what's going on in the world as well as we can, then I highly suggest you look at the description where you'll find details to sign up for PublicGyaan so you can join us on the platform. But that said, Pranay, over to you. What exactly is this prediction market business and why is it that we have so many predictions this year?
Yeah, first of all, I should begin by saying that I am terrible at doing predictions, and I'm at the bottom rung of the predictors in our platform. Okay, so that's the caveat from my end. But to begin with, as you said, Anirudh, this year there have been a lot of predictions, and I think predictions have gained all the more importance in the beginning of 2021 just because of the discontinuity that COVID-19 has brought, right? Everything is up in the air. The future is more uncertain than it was before. So earlier you could have done predictions by just saying linearly that, last time the growth was 6%. So this year the growth will be 5% or 6-7%. The ranges were more or less known. But after COVID-19, everything is uncertain, right? So, and that ranges from politics to economics to geopolitics everywhere, right? So that's why a lot of things are up in the air, and hence you were seeing a lot of 2021 predictions, and they ranging from all ends. So, for example, I observed that there are two kinds of opinions. One are the opinions which say nothing has changed. There are no lessons from COVID-19. Things will pretty much be the way they were before. And the exactly opposite end of predictions are which are saying that COVID-19 is going to change everything else. And particularly, and just incidentally, it is going to change the thing that I am most interested in as well, right? So that's the second kind of view which is coming up. But what I feel is both these kinds of views sort of are susceptible to something that Philip Tetlock in his book Super Forecasting calls outcome irrelevant learning. And Anupam and I have done an episode on this before on ATP. Outcome irrelevant learning just means that irrespective of what happens in reality, people are always in a very good position to say that, I said so, and they claim that I was always right. Let me give you an example. So, for example, people will say US will get more confrontational with China in 2021. An outcome irrelevant learning would be that towards the end of 2021, regardless of what happens, people will pick up one instance of Joe Biden doing something against China and say that, yes, it did get confrontational. So it's unless we make specific and measurable predictions, it is very tough for people to say which way US has actually become confrontational overall or not. So that's why prediction markets help in correcting this outcome irrelevant learning by actually getting people to bet on very specific and measurable predictions. And then you can compare this towards the end of the year, whether you were right or wrong. And that way you will then be able to recorrect your biases and reflect on them. So this episode will only make sense actually if we have one similar episode at the end of 2021 and actually compare whether we got our predictions right or not.
Yeah, I think we haven't done an episode where we do something at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year to see what we got right and what we got wrong. That would be definitely something interesting to do. But also that's an interesting general point that you make, Pranay, because you see so many op-eds making all kinds of very, very broad predictions, right? Which are very difficult to kind of actually measure. But as you look for more and more specific outcomes, people are kind of beholden to using their expertise in more critical ways because they essentially have skin in the game, right? And that forces them to be a little more careful with what they're saying, a little more critical with what they're predicting. So it just generally seems like an interesting method to me. So that said, what are your predictions for 2021, guys? Anupam, what do you say?
All right, thanks. My first prediction is that none of the other predictions will come true. Or rather, I mean, the probability of other predictions coming true is probably like 50%, which means that it's not really clever predictions. But as Pranay said, the idea is to try and make more specific predictions. So I could, say that the Indian economy will do reasonably well, and that'll give a lot of, space for it's ambiguous enough that I will be correct at the end of the year. So instead, I'm going to put my neck out there and say that the Indian economy will have an amazing first quarter. And the reason for that would be actually statistical in nature rather than actual economic activity. So there will be, of course, a pickup in economic activity, but because of what you would call as the base effect, that is Q1 of previous year was terrible because of the pandemic. So you could expect that Q1 of this year will be better. Better as in you'll have something like a 7 or 8% growth sometime down the line because of the base effect. And people will read that as an amazing comeback of the Indian economy, etc. So I think I'm equally interested in the narrative that would be surrounding the Indian economy, I think, doing better in this year than the actual numbers. So what would happen, as I said, is that, of course, there's going to be a increase in economic activity. I think that is fairly obvious to see, as everyone else can also make out. But the fundamentals will still remain weak. I'm pretty sure of that as well. But again, because of the statistical anomaly, which was last year, where you have minus 26%, etc., you will see a big positive number this time, right? It's just statistics. I think the interpretation of that will have to, we'll have to be very careful about that. But I think there'll be a lot of let's say column inches dedicated to that one way or the other. That's just the first prediction.
Anupam, let me put you on a spot even more. So are you saying that, let me reframe your prediction, is it that year on year growth of in the first quarter of 2021 financial year will be around plus 8%?
Yeah, around that. I would say about 6 to 8%, given that last year it was minus 26%. Even if it does reasonably well, you'll see a big jump this time. Year on year growth, yes, will be positive. It'll be above, it'll be above 5%.
Okay, so this isn't directly related to the outcome itself, Anupam, but just out of curiosity, what do you think is going to be powering this kind of growth? Is it just a return to normal, as it were? Is it going to be increase in consumption? What exactly is going to be driving this?
I think there's a return. There will be a gradual return to normalcy, and the level of economic activity is nowhere going to be close to pre-pandemic levels. But the fact that it's going to be so much better than Q1 of last year, where there was probably some of the strictest lockdown scene in the world, that is what is going to be spurring growth. So it's just about a slight return to nearing normal activity, but the biggest factor is going to be the statistical interpretation.
So, Anirudh, the comparison is with the last year's Q1, right? Which was when there was the entire economy was shut down, right? So, when you compare with that, obviously, just the fact that factories were open, there will be more people going to office, there will be positive growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute masterstroke, and now we have an indigenous vaccine and everything, so everything's back to normal. Wonderful, yay!
Yeah, we have to be very cautious about the economic growth numbers which are put in. Just like Anupam said, there will be base effect because you are going to compare with a previous year which was terrible in many different ways. So anything that comes now will be positive, hopefully, but that doesn't mean that it will be we are better off than we were in 2019-20. So I think the comparison has to be with that as well.
Yeah.
I think the bigger problems that were plaguing the Indian economy, the jobless growth phenomenon, they're all still around, right? We haven't really seen serious policy action to correct that either. So I think it's going to be important to not take our eyes off the forest and getting lost on statistical details like this one when they do come out.
Okay, over to Pranay. Your prediction?
Yeah, so I'll begin with things in the economy itself since Anupam brought that up. So there has been a lot of chatter about disinvestment and the government has set itself a very ambitious target as well. And there are news reports that there will be that the government plans to sell its stake in over 25 PSUs. Okay, but here's my prediction: a maximum of 2 CPSUs, that is central PSUs, will be privatized by the end of 2021. Okay, so that is where I'm sticking my neck out. And so
that's 2.
Yeah, my possibly Air India and BPCL, but they can change. But by the end of 2021, only these will be where the government sells all its shares. I expect there might be some other companies in which the government might slightly reduce its current stake, or the process might just not complete. But I think that just 2 will finally be privatized by the end of 2020.
I'll take you up on that bet, Pranay. I think 2 is being ambitious itself. I honestly don't think they'd be able to completely privatize Air India, given that they've been trying for a few years and they've not found any buyers. It's not about, I think it's no longer about government will to sell Air India. It's about whether you're going to have buyers at this thing. So the only way to probably sell Air India would be to massively underprice or at least reduce the price from what they're expecting now, because the only good parts of Air India are probably the slots, the capex, routes, etc. But otherwise, it's a dying machinery, right? And no one wants it. So I think even that 2 will be quite ambitious.
Yeah, I said a maximum of 2, but I am actually hopeful that this will happen because of the latest round of expressions of interest which were obtained. So it seems that this might go through, and so with BPCL as well. So yeah, we are putting our heads on the chopping block. Let's see what happens at the end of it.
Right. I'll carry on from that. Since you spoke about airlines, and I'll carry on from that. And this is regarding tourism. I would expect that in this particular year, which is the financial year, I would expect about a 70% overall 70% reduction in air traffic, which is, the numbers are not out yet, and this is again one of the questions. So this is from April 2020 to March 31st, 2021. During this period, I would expect a 70% reduction in air traffic. And the following year, I would expect about it to bounce back and returning to normalcy, which is or 10% lower than what it was for the previous year. So that's my prediction about air traffic. Tourism by itself, I think, would pick up and do quite well in the following year. I'm already beginning to see, good numbers in tourism, that people are venturing outside, people are more comfortable going out and staying at hotels and so on. So you might not see again a complete return to normalcy, but about let's say 80% return to normalcy for the following year. That's what I expect, and I would expect that there would also be. I mean, the numbers are not come in yet, but this December, the Christmas and New Year's period, that there would be a big spike. Because people have been staying at home for extremely long periods of time and everyone wanted to go out. I would have imagined that people have gone out. So when the numbers do come in, I would imagine a big spike right at the beginning of the year.
I mean, that seems like a reasonable enough prediction. I mean, I think there was a news item I came across recently about how about 500 people were stranded on the road to Manali. I have no idea why they were traveling in the middle of a pandemic, but if they were doing all this without a vaccine, then I can imagine reasonably enough that people will do a lot more once the vaccine comes out. But 80%, is that just a gut feel, Anupam, or is that backed by a specific kind of guess?
It's not really scientific, but I would imagine that there will still be about, quite a few people who are still scared to go out and, who are probably more vulnerable to the disease, who might not have gotten the vaccine yet, etc., would be a lot more careful. But in practically, again, that would be about 20% who would be extra careful and about 80% would return to normalcy. I think where you would see reduced figures is business travel. I think business travel will reduce quite a bit because a lot of it I think the realization has come that you don't really require to travel as much for business, and things can be done online. So there would be a reduction in business travel, but travel and tourism for leisure would get back towards normalcy. So that's my guess about that 75-80%.
Right.
That's an interesting point. I think it's a good sign for climate change as well, that not as many people are going to be traveling using private jets or whatever. But I mean, I think one interesting precedent that's been set by this pandemic is that it really matters how well your country is doing in terms of the spread of the coronavirus in order to ensure that your citizens are able to travel. Like we've seen, like at the beginning of this year itself, right? How many countries have banned travel from the UK because of the new COVID strain. So I'm personally curious to see whether that becomes like a permanent fixture of like global travel, that, you have to be coming from a country which doesn't have out of control spread, or that you need to have like a particular kind of vaccination profile which will be checked as you travel. That's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah.
So continuing on the economy, my next prediction is that GST rates by the end of this 2021 will still continue to have the 5 main rates of services, which are 0, 12, 18, 5 and 28. So those will continue. The reason I make this prediction is because there's a lot of chatter that there will be convergence in the GST tax rates that is going to come up, because you need to simplify it and it is quite unmanageable, right? So, but I still feel that it's going to be difficult this year. And the reason behind this sort of a guess is because of what the union government did with respect to the GST compensation cess. And there was a lot of confrontation between union and state governments over that. And I think that will make negotiations on any such bargaining going ahead much more difficult. So state governments will be more wary of giving away some of these tax rates and reducing it. So that's why I feel that there will be a status quo maintained on this. And despite all the noise being made, I think these rates will continue. So that's a sort of a depressing thing to say, but that's what I feel.
I have a little bit more to add to that. I think while that 5 rate will stay, and I completely agree with you on that one, what I would imagine to see is that there will be an increase of the number of goods in the exceptional categories as well, which is that about 28%. So a cess, a luxury cess, right? About over and about 28%. I would imagine that quite a few products will also come under that, because we know that, again, the union government and state governments are kind of, let's say, short for cash. They'd want to raise revenue as they've been, increasing taxes on fuel. And I think that's another prediction that you'd want to make later. But in order to kind of increase the tax collections and especially indirect taxes, I would imagine that they'd start putting cesses as well on certain products over and above the 28%.
Right. So more goods and services will get classified as luxury goods, right? Which there will be higher levels of cess. Yeah. Okay. Right. So continuing on that point, right? Like you said, Anupam, that governments are short of revenue, but governments will be slow to let go of the various things that they are involved in. So, which means that the only way they can continue to do what they are already doing is either to raise money through borrowing or by taxing people more for various services and also on specific indirect taxes as well. So what I think is going to happen is that petrol prices in our city will hit rupees 100 at least once before the end of 2021. That's my prediction. Again, a depressing one, but that's what's going to happen, because as we've seen, excise duties on petrol and diesel are really the measure of last resort for both our state and union governments. Whenever there is any problem in the economy, they just raise petrol and diesel prices, and because the effects are felt over a large amount of population, right? They are dispersed over a large number of people. So the pinch that every person feels is quite small. So the governments just keep doing this very easily. And you've seen this over the last year, actually. Crude petrol prices across the world had dropped, and yet we are paying around 89, 88 rupees because that's only because the excise duties have been increased. So I think that will keep increasing in 2021 also. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. When Brent crude was at $20 a barrel, we still had 85 rupees or so, which we were paying for petrol. So I don't see that reversing at all. Unfortunately, with something like tax rates, especially on indirect goods, the chances of something low, chance of state government or union government lowering the excise duty is extremely low. And even if they keep it at status quo, you would have a rebound of global petrol prices of crude oil, or rather global prices of crude oil, and thus it would inch towards 100. So I think, unfortunately, that is something we'd see. I would also expect, again, bad news for a lot of people, but I would also expect increased taxes on liquor, on cigarettes, and on a whole bunch of these items for the government to shore up money.
So a lot of what you guys are telling me is more of the same, and more of the same is not generally very optimistic. Do you see any big changes for the better happening over the course of 2021 in any area that kind of affects India?
I think this is a nice awkward silence, which tells a lot more than what we could say. No, I don't. In fact, I'm going to ignore that question and carry on with my other pessimistic prediction.
I have a positive one to say.
Oh, you have one? Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I think, overall, this is from a foreign policy angle. There is a lot of talk about how the new US administration might actually go soft on China. So I think that is not going to happen. So there will still be the mode of engagement will change with respect to how Trump dealt with China. But the specific prediction that I can make is we will see more travel bans from the US on Chinese officials. So as we know, last year around 14 Chinese officials were banned who were involved in the Hong Kong related democracy curbs which are happening in Hong Kong. So that, I think, even with Joe Biden administration, you will see maybe 20 more people at least who will be put on such list. So that will count as something where the new US administration will continue to hold China to account, especially on things related to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, etc.
What about Taiwan, Pranay? I mean, I think Taiwan reported that last year it had almost 400 incursions by Chinese aircraft into its airspace. Do you think that the US is going to conduct any, let's say, patrols in the Strait of Taiwan, for example, or would that be a little too much to expect from the Biden administration in its first year?
I think there will be more of these FONOPS operations which go on in and around the South China Sea. So those will continue. I don't see any significant drop in them, but I don't have the exact numbers on them, so I can't make a very good, very specific and measurable prediction of that.
Okay, so 20 Chinese officials are going to get travel bans by the end of this year.
At least.
We will see if right. At least 20. Okay, cool.
Carrying on that, this is a prediction I'd made slightly earlier in November when some publication had asked me for a quote on, how is the trade war going to shape up with Biden in charge. So I'm going to use that now, my thinking, which is that I don't think there will be a real softening of the trade war because even Biden actually in his campaign promises, etc., had, spoke about, in some sense, probably not the same words, but make in America, etc. So even Biden will be under, especially since the norm has been set, even Biden will be under pressure to, in some sense, stop the cheap imports from China, etc. So so there will be some pressure on that. So they might not do it in the same way that Trump was doing earlier, make a big announcement and etc. But there will be this kind of silent trade war that will keep continuing. I don't think there will be at least a reversal of the tariffs, etc. So even on Indian goods, and this is where it'll come down to, even on Indian goods, etc. I don't think there will be a reversal in terms of allowing India back into the generalized system of preferences agreement or lowering of the tariffs on Indian goods or special treatment for Indian goods, etc. So I think that norm which has been set, at least will be status quo for the foreseeable future.
And one thing that we very often talked about is about how the US-China trade war is an opportunity for Indian businesses, right? So in the aftermath of that whole fiasco that happened in Kolar, right? Do you see more American businesses kind of shifting towards India, or is it impossible to make a prediction on that matter at all?
It wasn't in Kolar though.
Sorry, it was a Apple manufacturing plant somewhere in southern Karnataka, right? I'm sorry, I seem to have gotten my areas mixed up, but the question still stands. Do you see more businesses relocating processes from China to India?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I really don't. As of now, there's nothing that tells me that India offers a great comparative advantage to countries to relocate from China to India. I mean, even if that relocation happens, I would imagine that a lot of it would be to probably Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia or some other country, right? A small portion might end up in India where it makes sense where if it brings the Indian market much closer, but it'll be nothing to write home about. That's my prediction.
Fair enough. So back to the doom and gloom, Anupam.
Yeah, back to doom and gloom. And since we are on the entire trade aspect, I would also, my other prediction is that there will be slightly more of Atmanirbharta kind of focus where. So I would imagine, or at least on a few key imports from China, we will see an increase in tariffs. And probably on we did an increase on electronic tariffs on electronic products. There will be some kind of increased duty on other products from China. That's one prediction. I know this is not a very specific prediction, and that's what the chance of it coming true is one way or the other this thing. But so I'm saying there will be an increase in duty, import duty on products from China. At the same time, I would also expect that I don't expect a trade deal with Europe to go through. That's another thing which is in the works. I don't see it going through because on both sides, we are, the same kind of issues persist. I don't think we'll suddenly reduce our, one of the main contentious issue is the subsidy that we give to our farmers. And now with this kind of new farm bills, etc., I don't see the government being in a hurry to remove some of those subsidies at least, which means that will be something which is stuck in the near future again. So that's, I don't see trade deals happening with Europe. And I see some kind of increase in import tariffs on products from China. And that's my prediction.
All right. So since we are talking China, one very important question, folks. So is our PM going to wish Xi Jinping happy birthday on social media platforms this year?
I don't know.
Okay. So related prediction to that, I think the Ladakh standoff that we have will continue. So there will be a status quo in terms of where the lands or the areas that China has occupied, that will continue as is in 2021. So there won't be any. There are a lot of talks about negotiations going on and disengagement, all that, but I feel that whatever has happened will continue, and it's not as if it will also escalate, because now both sides are have forces there, and they will just continue the status quo as it stands now.
Yeah, so I mean, I can only speak from my experience with Doklam, but it seems to me that when the Indian side says disengage, it means that we are going to stop challenging the Chinese, and when the Chinese say disengage, it means we are going to stay where we are, and India is going to step back. Like we saw that in Doklam over the course of the last few years. India disengaged, China has continued to develop its military fortifications. We'll probably have a podcast about that in the next few days. But I can very briefly say that now China is moving into parts of Bhutan that India and Bhutan have always thought have been part of Bhutan, and that weren't really disputed. We're also hearing that China is moving, relocating villages towards the border of Arunachal Pradesh, near the Tawang area. So I kind of feel like there isn't a lot of political will to kind of push back against Chinese activities like that. So I don't know what a exact measure would be, but I would say that before the end of 2021, perhaps we will see at least one other major Chinese incursion. I don't know whether it'll hit the news cycle in the same way, but I'm sure it'll happen. I don't think it'll be politically. I mean, just logically speaking, though I don't know, of course, if logic is really the best way to predict the exalted deliberations of those in the PMO. But given that Fauji has come out and the Chinese apps continue to be banned, I don't know if it would be politic for there to be a birthday greeting for Mr. Xi. But yeah, I don't see the strategic situation on the border getting any better, as Pranay said.
Yeah, no, if there is something on Ladakh, some sort of negotiation, then all the other theatrics will follow, right? So then you will have, in the process of normalization, you will have birthday greetings exchange, and some BRICS summit again, both of them shaking hands and things like that. But I don't see that happening this year.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like both sides have, at least domestically, kind of backed themselves into a corner. Like, it doesn't seem like there's much of an Overton window for a big outreach. At least right now, I don't know how things might change, but as things stand right now, I don't see that really happen.
Right. Okay. I will move on away from China then. Just picking up from one train of thought, which is on the banning of the apps, etc. On the tech front, I have one prediction to make, which is that there will be one big government action against big tech in India, which is either trying to curb some of this thing there'll be, or either big, really anti-competitive case, etc. This stems from the fact that Europe has gone really big against this in terms of its new Digital Markets Act, and which severely, I think, restricts the kind of activity that Facebook and Google and Amazon, etc., are involved in. So that's a big kind of move in Europe. In the US, again, you've had congressional committee which looked into the anti-competitive practices. You have multiple cases going on against Google and Amazon and Facebook, etc. In some sense, India has always followed either one of these two. And since they're extremely busy, I would imagine that India doesn't want to be left too far behind, and therefore there will be a really big kind of government action against some of the big tech companies. We don't know what exact shape it'll take. For instance, it might not, and this is another sub kind of prediction with a lot less confidence, I have to say, but it might not take the route of it coming through the competition authority, which is the CCI, because last time, as we saw, the move against Amazon and Flipkart, which is owned by Walmart, actually didn't come through the competition authorities, though the reasons given were of competition, but instead it came through some FDI norms and rules. So I would imagine there would be some kind of back channel rules against the big tech companies, and it'll come through the executive, which is from the government, rather than through a regulatory body such as CCI. Again, just a prediction. We don't know how. Yeah, I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but that's my prediction.
Do you also see something happening on perhaps the data localization or data privacy side of things, Anupam? Because there were some ominous moves last year already, if I remember correctly. So do you see perhaps any moves to break things like end-to-end encryption, or any moves to kind of force data localization, ensure that Indian data is only processed in India?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I would first imagine some kind of privacy law to take shape in India probably this year, and at the same time some kind of data protection, especially in terms of data centers and so on. There was quite a bit of talk. Of course, nothing happened last year because of the pandemic. I would imagine that to be taken up again, probably towards the second half of this year. Whether it'll come into effect this year or not, I'm not sure. Probably not, but at least it'll gain momentum towards the second half of this year. The other, in terms of big tech, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but in the other area of activity I see is in terms of labor regulation in the gig economy. So there be some kind of new rules or regulations or codifications of labor laws, or extension of the application of labor laws to the gig economy, etc. I would imagine some kind of activity there.
Right. I have no more predictions to add, but I just wanted to sort of end this by saying that making good predictions is really tough. We can always make generalized things, but here we've tried to make some specific predictions, and let's see how biased we were while thinking about these ideas next year. So Anirudh, we must do an episode same time next year and evaluate how wrong we were.
Yes, we will. That sounds like a good idea, Pranay. I'm sincerely hoping that we're wrong on a lot of things, because being right on all these things would not be a very optimistic picture.
Good one. Yeah.
But all right. So thank you both so much. This has been a pretty informative discussion. Once again, to all of our listeners, if you find the idea of predictions interesting, and if you want to weigh in with your own ideas on these predictions that we've made over the course of this episode, please check out our description. You will find a link to sign up for our prediction market there. And the password will be clairvoyance. Is that with or without caps, Anupam?
Without caps.
Without caps. So hope to see you all there on PublicGyaan. And thank you all for listening to All Things Policy.
Please consider signing up for Takshashila's courses. Applications are now open, and you can apply at www.takshashila.org.in/courses. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST, or our website, takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, it's 2021 now. It's time you did. You didn't in 2020. That was bad enough. But now in 2021, you really, really should. It's IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And a quick reminder to everybody, just please help us out with our survey, ivmpodcast.com/survey. We've had a number of you fill it out so far, but we want to shatter last year's number, right? Really, really blow that up. Go fill out the survey over there. If you do, we'll select from the emails that we have got submitted, and we'll be sending out some interesting swag to people. So what should you be listening to this week? First thing I want to talk about is the unprecedented episode. We did a triple crossover. Vineet Kanabar from Storytellers and Storysellers, Varun Dugirala from Advertising is Dead, and Karthik Nagarajan from the Filter Coffee podcast all got together and put together a mega episode. Do check it out on whichever of their feeds you want. It's available on all three. On Naan Curry, the guy spoke about the history of alcohol in India. It's got a longer history than people would think. Definitely do check it out. Another show I want to call out this week a little bit is The Note by Maruk Inayat. Maruk had 2 fantastic episodes this week. She did her first episode with Amitabh Mattu about the elections in Kashmir, and then she did another one where she told the story of how she faked her identity to interview Benazir Bhutto. Definitely do check it out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear friends. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. Life, as you know, is a journey. And you and I, travelers, how can we celebrate this travel? I have a podcast for you, Begin the Journey. I share stories and moments from my life. Do tune in every Monday and Thursday to listen to my podcast on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. Cheers.